All right, it's now a few minutes after 10, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. This is our virtual panel discussing inclusion and equality for people with disabilities in education and employment. My name is Laura Goslin. I'm the event manager here at DQ. I'm going to be moderating today's panel. Just a little bit of introductions before we get started. Our first panelist is Jamie Knight. He's a senior research engineer at BBC. He's waving currently, and that is Lion with him. Jamie enjoys mountain biking and is never seen far from his plush sidekick Lion. His areas of expertise include accessibility, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and autism. Our second panelist is Tim Hershberger. He's an accessibility consultant at DQ. Tim has been visually impaired since a young age, but he's very passionate about accessibility and believes it should be a part of the web development process. Next, we have Birkir Gunnarsson. He's a senior UX and digital accessibility expert at BB&T. Birkir was born and raised in Iceland. He attended Yale University and has been visually impaired since the age of 5. And last but not least, we have Dr. Paul Bowman. He's the director in training at DQ Systems and certification chair of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Dr. Bowman is a multifaceted education technology leader and curriculum creator and analyst whose doctoral dissertation evaluated master levels technology in education. So just real quick, why we're hosting the panel today is in celebration of International Day of People with Disabilities. This is a holiday that's been around since 1992, and it was created by the United Nations. The theme for this year is empowering people with disabilities with ensuring inclusiveness and equality. The 2030 Agenda pledges to leave no one behind. Persons with disabilities as both beneficiaries and agents of change can fast-track the process towards inclusiveness and sustainable development and promote a resilient society for all. Government, people with disabilities and their representative organizations, academic institutions, and the private sector need to work as a team to achieve these goals. So that is why our panel today is focused on EDU and employment. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of our panelists. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. So the first question I have is, panelists, how has your identity lenses evolved over time as you've been in public spaces such as EDU and employment? I'm going to pass it along to Jamie first to answer this question.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Okay, so lenses and identity is quite a complicated thing. So to catch on quickly, I'm autistic. And when I was a child, I was taught that I had autism and that I was a person with disability. And I kind of internalized it and kind of learned to hate the autism and see it as a limiting factor in a set of problems. Although as I met more inclusive environments, as I came across more, ironically, other disabled people, I slowly came to the understanding that it wasn't so much the autism that was the issue as the barriers within the environment. So we have the social model of disability, the idea that it's a mismatch between an individual and their environment. So then I kind of turned the lens around and started seeing myself as, okay, well, I'm Jamie. How can I get the most out of my life? Okay, I can get the most out of my life by focusing on autonomy and productivity. What are the barriers that get in the way of me doing that? So that's kind of like the big change for me. I know it's bad, and I probably shouldn't say this straight at the start of the panel, but does anybody else on the panel find persons with disabilities kind of like oh God? Anybody else, or just me?
Oh, yes. We're just persons. I mean, we could have... I've never heard of persons with red hair as a specific category. Well, sometimes, but...
Yeah, it's this thing, so I know that the person first language is often seen as a way of seeing the person first, but if I'm honest, if you have to see the person first when you look at me, there are far bigger problems than me being autistic. So I think that's one of the big lenses over time. I know that identity language is kind of new to the autism community, as more and more autistic people find our voices. But I know it's pretty common in the blind community. Has the identity lens from someone with a vision disability to a blind person affected anybody else on the panel?
Well, when you're not walking into trees, blindness is not necessarily just a big problem. Depends on the environment and to what extent it accommodates you. So I totally agree with your assessment there. People always think that people with disability, all we dream about every day is to be cured, and the medical cure. I live in the south part of the USA, and this is the Bible Belt. People are very religious, and I've been stopped on the street multiple times and walk around with a cane by, I'm sure, somebody that means well, but I find them kind of patronizing and say, "Oh, we'll pray for you to get your sight back, and if you join our congregation or so and so, you might get your sight back." And last couple of times I asked the person, "Do you think I necessarily want that?" And they just meet that with an embarrassed silence and often just walk away.
Yeah, there's this weird idea that normal is the best route rather than just the most common. It's a little bit like saying red cars are the best cars. Why? Because they sell the most.
Right.
Okay, but that's not actually a defining characteristic of the cars.
They're just people. If somebody offered me $1 million, I'd take that over getting my sight back and maybe losing my job because I'm no longer a really good accessibility person and I have to relearn everything from scratch. Think of us as people and think how you can make our environments inclusive so we can achieve the way we are instead of always trying to change us.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the big message that I'm learning through the years. I've come more and more to think of it that way.
I completely agree. One of the things that I think has been interesting about, I'm going to use that phrase, my journey with autism, or becoming an autistic adult is, I think, the more common way of putting it, is that over time I've learned to go, okay, Jamie, you're a bloody engineer, so engineer the problem, and go, okay, well, there are demands on one side and the amount of energy I have on the other side, make the most of the energy I've got. So, for example, I absolutely struggle with cooking. I don't have a great sense of heat, and it's one of those things that isn't very defined. I've got a stick, and the color of the stick matches the color of a cooked sausage. So if I change to a different type of sausage, I need to get a different type of stick. So rather than spend half of my energy for the day trying to work out how to cook sausages, I have support people do that, and it costs me about £10 a day. And instead, the same half day's worth of energy can go on working for the BBC and having a career and being able to go places. So a lot of it for me was about engineering the environment around me, not on the body and the abilities I wish I had, but on the actual abilities I've got. And then I started to find that once I stopped the stigma and pity lens and started going, hey, autistic awesomeness, I could take strategies that helped me and then find that they're very helpful to people who weren't autistic, who might, let's say, have a child or be very busy.
Also, I've heard sausages are not good for you. Just switch to carrots and you don't have to worry about cooking.
So as long as they're not moldy, carrots are good.
Great. So I think that is a really great answer all around to the first question. I'm just going to move on to the next one, guys. So how important was web accessibility to your overall success, either when you were at university or if you're in your current job, or just accessibility in general? I don't know. Tim? Oh, go ahead.
No, Tim can go. I can talk for England.
Well, it's been a while since I've been in school. And I mean, I've taken courses since then. And accessibility is important. I've run into problems when there's lack of accessibility. Sometimes you miss material. You don't know what you think you know what went on, but you find out later you didn't. You didn't have a complete understanding of the environment or the item. You missed something critical, and you didn't know it was critical because you didn't know it existed. And they didn't know you missed it because they're used to teaching or whatever the environment is. They don't think about it because they don't think about it from that perspective that this stuff may not be accessible to somebody with a disability. whatever that disability type is. So it definitely can make that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is sometimes it can make things more difficult. I used to have to take a course every year. They had lots of accessibility issues, and honestly, it was very frustrating. Honestly, it was very emotionally draining to do that all the time as well. So those kind of things, trying to deal with those issues, it makes the whole. I think Jamie mentioned something about this before. I end up spending a lot more time, effort, trying to deal with those issues, work aware on those issues, engineer a way to work through those issues, right? And that's energy I could have been applying to learning the subject or doing the work, or so that's that often means that I end up using some either have to spend overall a lot more energy to accomplish something, or for the same amount of energy I end up doing less because I'm dealing with those other issues that kind of make the accessibility issues.
I have an analogy that's a bit like that. So please apologize for the slightly bad analogy. I build kit cars for fun, so I'm a bit of a nerd. The way that I've tried describing it to people is it's like I'm an electric car and most people are petrol cars. So I don't really fit into the infrastructure that's out there. However, for the things that electric cars are good at, like acceleration and, of course, emissions, they're the best. But if you drive them like a petrol car, they go wrong. So I say, if you imagine trying to drive an electric car up the hill and putting like an elephant in the back seats, that's what it's like for me when I'm having to constantly overcome barriers. It's both not the thing I'm good at, and I'm having to carry all this extra weight of the barriers. But if instead we take away the barriers, it's like using an electric car for pizza delivery, where they're quicker, easier to charge, can be a lot cheaper, and run a lot better. They're a better fit for the problem at hand. So the question was, how important was web accessibility to your overall success? Mm-hmm. I don't think I could be me and live with the autonomy and independence I have in both work and education 10 years ago, because as I might talk about again later, I often have trouble with speech, and I have no verbal speech at all. And all the way through my education, I had assistive communication devices that ranged from big clunky laptops to smartphones. Now, back 10 years ago or 15 years ago, everything was about writing. Everything was about discussion and talking, and I couldn't take part. That was a barrier that I couldn't come across. However, with modern technology and Slack and Jira and email, nobody knows that I can't speak. It stops being an impairment. It doesn't matter. It's no longer disabling me that I can't pick up the phone and call someone, because quite frankly, they don't want me to call them. They want me to drop them a message on Slack.
Right.
So as technology has changed, and as that technology has been accessible to me, it's given me it's both removed the barriers, so I'm wasting less energy overcoming barriers, but the technology is slowly actually fitting the way that I work better. So it's even, in some cases, becoming an advantage. I've spent 15 years trying to communicate something complicated in as few words as possible. Basically, I spent 15 years practicing how to use Twitter, so it's kind of pretty useful.
Thanks, Jamie. Bakir, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have an official apology and, excuse, I guess, why I'm not, a really rich investment banker today. Well, I claim so. But basically, I had it fairly easy when I was going through school. I have like a whole army of people to help me transcribe books, give me stuff in Braille. When I got into Yale, I had a whole army of readers. I think I got my entire tuition back in the number of people I employed. So I was able to get through university, take the courses that I wanted with minimal complaints, and I really managed to master the subject. Then I started working in banking as an analyst, and that's where I hit the wall. So it's not about, basically, there were some certifications I needed. There's one called CFA, Certified Financial Analyst, not Certified Financial Planner. I could have taken that too, but there's another one for risk management, financial risk management. but I was not able to get any of those materials in a format that was even remotely accessible to me. And because I wasn't in school, and this is provided by a professional organization, I wrote the emails and they say, well, guide us on how to do it, or just hire yourself an assistant to go through it. And I'm like, well, I work 10 hours a day and I have to color code my clothes for washing, and I have to figure out how to cook and get to the grocery store. And this is back in those days where you couldn't use apps to do it. And I was single, so I had nobody to help me with it. But I just didn't have the energy. So a couple of years went by and I just kind of lost interest in that. And eventually the whole banking system collapsed. Of course, you know, if I had my certifications, I could have saved it, but or not. So I switched careers and went into accessibility out of frustration. And, you know, anybody can say this. Maybe I just wasn't a good fit for the certifications. Maybe I spent too much time on partying and women in my 20s. Well, partying at least. But honestly, I wasn't given the chance, and I didn't have the time to self-advocate to just get access to the material that I needed to advance in my career. And that was just an absolute, you know, showstopper. It was a wall. So this is why access to information is such a huge, huge issue to people with disabilities, is access to opportunities to, you know, maximize who you are. Go ahead.
I have another slightly scary example of that. When I was a teenager, I was in the UK, we have a thing called council tax. So every house pays a certain amount of money to the local council, and it pays for things like bin collection. And you apply for it online. And I got halfway through the form, misunderstood a question, and then never finished the form. One of the questions I didn't answer was how they could get in touch with me. So I didn't know about it for about 8 months. And by the first time I knew about it was when the police were knocking on the door and basically going, you need to pay this or you might go to prison. And that was just that the information wasn't put in a way that was accessible to me. Part of it was also my own fault. Well, not my own fault, but my own. Now, I was talking earlier about lenses. This is back at the, I've got autism, but I'm going to beat it by trying really hard. So I wasn't accepting help from people. So rather than dealing with my post, I just got overwhelmed by it and managed to completely misread every single letter they sent me or not read it at all. So there's kind of two things that came with that. One is I now ask for help with my post. And the second side of it is like the access to, when developers are building things, it's a good question to ask, can somebody go to prison if they misunderstand this form? And if the answer is yes, pay a lot of attention to that form, because it's surprisingly easy to find yourself in a lot of trouble over what could be a minor misunderstanding of a single word.
Well, and it's interesting what you guys are talking about, because that is in many ways the reason I end up in doing accessibility. So I started out as a developer, got into doing accommodations, and when I was working on accommodations, it was very quick. I very quickly realized that it would be a whole lot easier to give someone a screen reader and have them be able to do their job or whatever else they might need to do their job if the environment was more accessible. Mm-hmm. That, you know, if the environment isn't accessible, then frankly, assistive devices or adaptive devices don't really help as much. So, yeah. And it adds to that frustration. So the main reason I got into accessibility was because I realized that if I really wanted to help people be able to do their job or complete their task or whatever they're trying to do, I needed to try to help people make that environment more accessible, more inclusive, than focus on, you know, the adaptive tool piece of it. Even though that's an important part of it, it was just, you know, that was the reason I got into that. I ended up doing accessibility.
Yeah, that was one quick thing.
Go ahead.
I don't have a disability myself, but I'll tell a quick story by proxy. So I was talking to one of our clients that we've worked with, and they had a website where you could book flights. So they did a test to see how long it would take someone without a disability to book a flight, just knowing what the basic information, where they wanted to go and the dates. And it took an average of about 5 minutes to complete the process. And then they had someone with a screen reader do the same thing on this particular site before they fixed it. They did fix it, by the way. But it took that person between 45 minutes to almost an hour, depending on, they did the task multiple times. And the people who were running the test, just kind of watching this person with the screen reader go through it, and they're like, just click here, just do this. And, they wanted to intervene, but of course that would ruin the test. And so it took so much longer for this person to perform that task that you can imagine now multiply that with every little task that you have to do throughout your life and throughout your day and throughout your professional career. And that's, well, not technically inaccessible because the person did complete the task. It's not reasonable. It's not really possible to live like that.
It can often be an accumulation of small challenges that become disabling rather than one massive challenge on their own. A good example of this is I'm very, very lucky that there's a lovely support lady who comes to visit me in the morning to help me with my morning routine. I can dress myself, I can do my teeth, I can make porridge. All of the tasks that she helps me with, I can do alone. Doing them in the right order, remembering to do them, not getting distracted by something, not wandering out the front door without any shoes on, etc., requires a monumental amount of energy. Versus having somebody who basically sits in the lounge watching telly and goes, have you done your teeth now? Yes. Jamie, you just said you're fully dressed, but you're not wearing any trousers, but you are wearing shoes. That's quite impressive. So rather than kind of constantly fighting against the way my brain works, I've gone, okay, I'm not going to be good at some things, so I'll get help and support with that. But I'm pretty sure that Mary, who does my morning routine, isn't very good at JavaScript. So I'll focus on the JavaScript, and then she can help me with the areas where I struggle.
This is exactly what you kind of have to choose. I found that, especially when I was living by myself. As a disabled person, you have to choose between being a really capable disabled person that can do everything else, but it takes an enormous amount of time with your Braille instructions and Braille labeling all your appliances and color, getting a color sensor for your clothes. Fortunately, that's easier now. And being independent. But if you do all those things, you are not going to have the time or energy to be good at other things. So I was fortunate that I had a decent paying job. And like Jamie said, I was able to hire a person to help me with grocery runs, minor cooking, some laundry. I think I'd never be good at laundry anyway. This is a male stereotype, but in my case, it fits. I'm terrible. I still don't know how to fold. I've tried, but I just can't do it.
One of the lenses that changed is when I was a kid, everything was about living independently. These days, we focus instead on living with autonomy. And the difference is independent means I don't need any help for anything. Autonomy means that I make all of the big decisions about my life. So if we take, for example, food and cooking. So I've got a sippy cup to drink from today, because if I use an open cup, I'm going to pour it over my laptop at some point. It's not a case of if it will happen, it's a case of when it will happen. So if I change to use this, it doesn't matter. I'm not quite brave enough to tip it upside down over my laptop. No, I probably shouldn't do that, but it makes it so it doesn't matter. So what I'm doing there is, rather than expressing independent living skills for cup management, I'm going, sod your bloody cup management. I'll just have a cup that doesn't leak everywhere. Your cup's badly designed. So this focus on about making decisions, so autonomy, making decisions as and for myself, means making decisions as an autistic person to do things that work for me as an autistic person, rather than a sort of brittle independence. So when I did live independently, I was totally independent for food. I didn't eat 3 days a week, but I was totally independent for food. And it just ended up becoming counterproductive.
Yeah, and actually in some ways, I think that's the way everybody else lives, right? It's not, people talk about being independent, but if you really look at each person's life, right, we're not necessarily independent. I think a lot of times people have difficulty with people with disabilities because how we do things or where we look for assistance from other people is different from what they do, right? It's in ways that they don't think about. They just take it. they take it for granted that's how you do stuff. When it's, for us, it's completely, I mean, honestly, I don't really think about being blind all that much. It's just a part of who I am, right? And there's some things I do that where I need help, that as someone who could see might need help. But there's other things I do that, you know, where I don't need assistance at all. Like, you know, we talk about the things that we do good at. I think in many ways, that's really how, that's more similar to what other people do. It's just the details are different.
There's an autistic theorist called Damien Milton, who has this thing that he calls the double empathy problem, which is that a lot of issues in autism land especially, but I imagine in other areas too, isn't that autistic people don't have empathy. It's that neurotypical people who are not autistic, also don't have empathy to see it from our perspective. So we both have empathy, but we entirely miss each other. So what can sometimes happen is a very well-meaning person who comes up with some new behavior therapy to reduce the amount that somebody flaps or stims or, you know, flicks their fingers in order to make them more socially acceptable. Actually, long-term, they end up causing far more problems because the person's learning that they're not allowed to be themselves, and suppressing the stims becomes an all-consuming thing, and then they can't learn maths because they're too busy trying not to flick their fingers, when actually the flicking fingers didn't matter in the first place. I think that can sometimes be an issue. When people say to me, "Oh, what can we do to make our website or our service more accessible?" I normally never give them a technical solution. My answer is almost always, hire more people who use the accessibility features you have. Have a blind developer, have autistic people on staff. That's the simplest way to do it, because then rather than it being a step that you have to consider separately, a step where you have to try and empathize with other users, you can just have it built in from the start with those people. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a rant. I'll let someone else talk.
No, that's good. Actually, might ask a question kind of on the theme of what we're talking about in terms of assistance and things like that. If you could provide an example of like simple little things universities or employers can do either as a resource or in terms of accessibility. I know, Jamie, you just gave that one example, but maybe as a resource to ensure the success of people with disabilities, that might be helpful.
I have a nice easy one.
Sure.
Which is modern LED lighting and old fluorescent tubes are bloody awful. An awful number of autistic people find themselves stuck in offices where they can see all the lights flickering. Simply changing the light bulbs. That's what. So when I was first at the BBC, probably my second job at the BBC, I used to sit there kind of reeling because I could see the screen vibrating, the floor vibrating, everything was vibrating. And of course, at the time, I didn't realize it was the lighting. I thought I was having a fit or something. And in the end, it just turned out to be stop using really cheap LCD displays because they have this flicker I can see, and move away from old fluorescent lighting. So sometimes the modifications to the environment don't have to be huge or expensive, but it's just taking that perspective of where are the barriers in the environment and how much do they impair people. So yeah, lighting is a common one, sound. Another one that is a little bit harder because it requires the concept of stigma. I've got a giant fluffy lion. You might notice him. He's quite noticeable. And when I was first at the BBC, I hid Lion. He stayed in my backpack. These days, he comes out all the time because Lion acts to me a little bit like a white cane does for a visually impaired user. He indicates to people that there's something going on. Now, I don't know if holding a big fluffy lion will ever become a standard signifier of being autistic. It would be awesome if it was, but it's probably not likely. But at least at the BBC, at places where I go, it can often be enough just to remind people that I have slightly different needs from the environment. In the last couple of years, the number of colleagues and people who I've worked with who, when I'll turn up for a meeting, will lean across and turn the lights down has probably increased 10 times since I started taking Lion everywhere with me. So hopefully that's a good example. Yeah.
So from the blind perspective, it's a little trickier to focus on just one thing. And, since we basically all work in accessibility and we talk about BICAC standards and meeting every single BICAC success criteria and so on, people sometimes wonder, why is that so important? Which one is the most important? And that comes back to something we were talking about previously. It's the accumulative problems. So, if a label is missing for one single field, yeah, it can break 2 or 3 success criteria. But if this is the only thing wrong on the page, you're going to figure it out as a screener user, probably. But then maybe the same if you have one set of radio buttons, the common labels. But the minute you have 2 of those, it gets that much more difficult to understand which field should have which label. And this is why, why the WCAG standard is so strict on every single thing being correct, because we don't know. Once we have 2 or 3 things wrong on the page, the cumulative understanding of the page breaks down so quickly. This is why, I guess, unfortunately, it's really hard to have a simple answer for how can you accommodate somebody. Although I would say, from thinking digitally, because I think digitally every day, but if you have a system, at least make sure that users can understand how the system works, what is the structure of your course, and make sure that users can navigate to every slide or screen of every course. That's something that can be addressed centrally. Then you can deal with the content on each individual screens in collaboration with the professors or whoever creates it. But at least make sure the user can understand the system and get to the screens, every single screen that they need to review. That kind of helps them break down the problem and address the solution strategically. Of course.
One thing that we do so at the BBC, rather than having a giant central accessibility team, we have distributed champions. And within each major product and team, there'll be an accessibility champion or 2. We don't use the WCAG at the BBC for a whole host of reasons. But one of them is that the comprehensiveness of it can make it seem like a long tail, like a never solvable problem. We tend to find that you can get 80% of the way, 80% of the time with effectively 3 things, which is when you're using color, don't use color for meaning. So color should support meaning rather than, if you can only tell something apart by color, then there's a problem. And color contrast, ensuring there's enough contrast. Focus, which is the ability to move the focus around the page using the tab key. That's kind of essential because lots of other stuff builds on top of that. And labeling, so making sure that everything the focus key lands on has a label that makes sense. If you hit those 3 things, we think you do kind of get 80% of the way there, 80% of the time. But as just being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good experience or an experience that won't have enough small issues to become disabling to the user. But when I'm working with new champions, I kind of go, okay, ignore our guidelines for a minute. These are the first 3 areas. Go look at some pages and go think about these 3 things.
And I'm going to suggest one more thing too, and that's communication. So I come from a bit of a usability background, and one of the things that's important in usability is you really you talk to users. You talk to them. You watch. Do usability testing where you watch people, like Paul was talking about. Example, having somebody with a screen reader go through the process. You watch them do that work, those things. You have to communicate with them. You ask them questions. You ask them to provide you with information, kind of like we're doing here in this thing. Honestly, if you really want to make things accessible, that's WCAG is provides you information on the things that are most likely to be issues most of the time. But really, it's talking to people with disability, and part of it is if you don't have a disability yourself, right? And even if you do it, being blind, I understand being blind to some degree, but I don't understand being deaf as well, right? So the idea is go out and find people and sit down and have conversations, even if you don't think there's issues. Ask about how they use your product or how they take your courses or what kind of issues. Have conversations, and really that's the key is, right? You design things better if you understand the people you're designing for, and so that's, I think, a key thing that you can do. That's honestly not necessarily all that difficult, other than it takes the time and effort, and you have to keep it in front of your mind.
There's also a thing about having permission to have mistakes. Sometimes I think it's easy to be so worried about not doing it right that nothing happens at all. And at the BBC, we have this thing where the champions, I've had it happen myself. I've seen a champion go, we're going to build it some certain way. And I've been sat there chewing my fingers going, oh, God, don't do that. That's really not going to work. But rather than jump in and tell them, I need to wait for them to build it, release it, get feedback, learn, and move forward. Now, because we do releases every few minutes, I know that it's only going to be broken for a small number of people for a small amount of time. But having that opportunity to learn from users, to speak to users, to see things go right, to see things go wrong, is really valuable. It also helps build up confidence. And then suddenly accessibility is far less of a black magic box than it originally appears.
And this is one thing I loved about my new job. Well, it's not new. I've been here for 2 years now. But, you know, the selling point for the job at BB&T is accessibility is part of our UX, our user experience team. It's not a separate thing we're going to build a team about. You know, we have to think about WCAG as the framework because that provides guidance, that is the legal compliance, and unfortunately, you know, sometimes we have to focus on that over, or anybody has to focus on that over the true user experience. But the idea that accessibility is really a way to create a better experience for everybody. That's what excites me about accessibility. We can create better content for more people in more situations rather than focusing on any specific group. And that's, you know, it's sometimes more difficult to sell and it's more difficult to achieve because you have to think from so many more kind of angles. But that is, I find that the most inspiring about doing the job that I do is I really think I'm making a difference for everybody.
Sometimes it's the non-obvious things as well. So a few years ago, I was having quite a rough day and I went into a BBC building and I put my pass into the machine upside down and it went beep, 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 beep so loud that I didn't speak for 2 hours and recoiled into a ball in the corner. And originally I said to my line manager, sorry, I'm so useless, and went into the self-attack, etc. He went, gosh, that really was quite loud. So he did a bit of research, and of course we've got BBC R&D, so they went and measured it with like a microphone on a stand at a set distance. And it turns out that that door buzzer was set to the same volume as an aircraft taking off in this little tiny hallway. And people knew that it was loud, so people were avoiding the building because they knew that this buzzer was really loud. But I was the first person to actually go, it's broken. And my line manager was the first person to go, hang on a minute, Jamie, I don't think the issue here is with you. I think the issue is with the barrier. So they then went and changed the barrier and made it less loud. And then utilization of that office and those meeting rooms and those breakout areas suddenly went up. So the BBC probably got hundreds of thousands of pounds of value simply by removing a barrier that otherwise wouldn't have been come across, that was affecting everybody, but wasn't necessarily as obvious to everybody.
Just one more point that I'll add to. So when we work with our clients on web accessibility issues, we're typically focusing on the public-facing website. And that there's a good reason for that. There are legal ramifications if you don't have an accessible presence. But one of the most effective things to kind of piggyback on the idea of hiring people with disabilities is assuming that you've already done that, which you shouldn't assume because a lot of companies never do that. But let's assume that you do have a company that does hire people with disabilities. Make an internal commitment to have your internal resources and your internal processes and the companies that you do business with internally, make them sign something, you have a contract, have a commitment from them to have their resources be accessible. And I will say that's far easier said than done. Anyone who's worked at our company where we have hired people with disabilities left and right, or at least that's what we're trying to do, also knows that our internal resources have not been perfect there, and that the third-party resources that we've had for various things have not always been the best. And it's just because it is difficult. But if you make an internal commitment to doing that, or at least an intent to do that, you're going to be much farther along than if you say, well, we're going to focus on the external website because we have to, but internally, not so important. But that's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. So if we go back to the idea of hiring people with disabilities, how can you hire people with disabilities if your own internal processes don't support that? And so you kind of have to make a commitment before you have employees with disabilities to have internal resources that are accessible.
And I'll also add something onto that as well. It goes back to something Jamie said about not needing to be perfect. Part of that it can work, right? So you're not where you would want to be with accessibility or internal stuff. But honestly, as a blind person who might be working for you, right? I know that things aren't perfect, right? I understand that. But when you're saying, hey, Tim, let's have a conversation. You're having problems with stuff. Let's talk about it. Let's get it fixed, right? And there's a definite commitment in that discussion. Honestly, I feel a little bit easier about the accessibility issues I do run into, because I know that we'll be working together to solve those things, right? It won't be me by myself trying to figure out how to work around or trying to convince people. I know that all the thing pieces are there to make it work, and we'll eventually get it solved. And that definitely is, where you don't have to be perfect, but if you're not, the thing is, part of that conversation and commitment and making sure that works through so that people can see that, people with disabilities can see that honestly helps out in that trying to make things more accessible and dealing with it when they aren't.
There's kind of two. Sorry.
Oh, just one quick line on that before I give Jamie's. If you have a course on diversity and accessibility for your employees, focus on that. Make sure your accessibility or diversity course is accessible. It's a great first step to exploring where you're at and how you can improve.
So I've got two little things on the thing about, it's almost like managing when it goes wrong. So that there are 2 points. The first point is that goodwill is an immensely valuable thing. And along with goodwill, you also get audience. So for example, we made a decision a few years ago at the BBC that we'd stop creating accessible games. We would just start building games. So if you have a child at a primary school in the UK and all of the other kids are playing the latest Danger Mouse game, well, that kid can play the Danger Mouse game too. We're not excluding them. So they're joining in with it. Now, the side effect of that is now we are getting to be known as being good developers of games. The same as if you're the one supermarket that has the accessible shopping cart, disabled people, we talk to each other. We'll tell people the easy routes to go down. So that's kind of one spin-off on that, which is the kind of the marketing, audience, etc. benefit. The other spin-off has currently drifted out of my head, so I'm trying to remember what it is. So I'll pass the floor back to someone else, and when I remember it again, I'll try and bring it up tactfully.
I'm actually going to switch gears here a little bit. Just want to ask, we've been talking about the assistance and what EDU and employers can do to help benefit people with disabilities. But I kind of want to talk about getting ahead of the problem and teaching it in EDU. So I'm going to field Dr. Bowman a few questions here. I know your dissertation focused on accessibility. I wonder if you want to talk a bit more about that and what you think about teaching accessibility in curriculum and how you think we can not solve but help the accessibility issue in the future as we're moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a starting point, I would say we have to approach this as both top-down and as a grassroots effort. We have to have people at the top of organizations, let's say at the top of university or even higher than that, the accreditors who are the ones that certify that this is going to be an accredited institution that can influence the whether a university even stays in business. If they have a commitment to accessibility and they require the curriculum to be accessible, which they don't really, by the way, at the moment. And by accessible, there's two sides to it. There's having the materials and the courses be accessible, and then there's teaching accessibility to people who are going to go out into their careers. Both are necessary. And then once you get into your careers, you want to have employers who also require it, who are committed to it. You want to have laws that also require it and that are committed to it. It kind of has to be the whole thing. Anytime that you have, it's the weakest link in the chain is what's going to break it. And one part of it that really needs attention is people who are coming into the technology fields are not always getting exposed to what accessibility is, why it's important, or even that it exists. In fact, I've been in this career for quite a long time, coming up on 20 years now. And when I first started, even now, but especially when I first started, I would say, people would ask, what do you do for a living? I say, well, I help train people how to make websites accessible to those with disabilities. And they usually go, oh, there's kind of this first reaction of, what's that mean? And then the next question might be, well, what type of disabilities are you talking about? And I say, well, in theory, all kinds of disabilities, and then we have to go up from there. But there is a problem that a lot of people who come into technology fields either come through it informally, and they kind of do a backdoor approach, and they don't get the training that they could have gotten. But even those who are in formal programs are not being exposed to accessibility as a part of the required part of training. So in the research that I did for my dissertation looked at some higher education models of teaching accessibility. There were a couple of programs that were dedicated just to accessibility, that you could get a degree in something related to accessibility, a master's degree in particular. Or there are some that were focusing on putting accessibility into already existing programs, already existing curriculum programs. And it turns out that of the ones that I looked at, and I looked at programs in the UK, in Austria, and the United States, and it turns out that the ones that were most successful were the ones that embedded accessibility into an existing curriculum. And even though one of the programs had actually failed, that was a master's program, it was dedicated just to accessibility, just to web accessibility. It completely failed. The first group of students was great, and then the second time around they had a hard time recruiting students, and then eventually they just didn't have enough students. And there's another example of a chicken and egg problem. There is definitely enough work out there, but the perception at the time that program came into being was that there wasn't enough, and so it just kind of didn't gain the traction that it needed. And there was another program that I looked at in the UK that after my dissertation was over, their program failed for a similar reason. That doesn't mean that you can't create a program dedicated to accessibility. I think it can succeed. Mm-hmm. But the most successful way by far to ensure that the information gets out there and that it's I guess, low risk, is to embed it into an existing program. Plus, you get the added benefit of having a whole group of people who probably didn't know about accessibility, maybe didn't care about it, who get exposed to it. And then when they go out into the workforce, they talk to their employer and say, I learned about this accessibility thing and we're not really doing it. Is that important? And hopefully the employer would then say, well, I don't know, we'll have to take a look at it, and then say, oh, okay, you're right. It is important. Of course, they could also just kill it right there and say, no, it's not important. We don't care. And that does happen too. But if we have this combination of people coming from the education sector into the workforce who are trained in accessibility, they're going to be influencers whether they think they're going to be or not.
Right.
By virtue of knowing the information. And then, of course, you have to have the people who are in charge of things take that and run with it and make it part of what they do. It has to be, like I said, both top down and bottom up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we have 10 minutes left. Time kind of flew by. I just want to open up this time for questions for the panel. So if people do have questions, they can post those in chat or the Q&A box.
Can I quickly interject one BBC-related thing?
Go for it, Jamie.
I mentioned before that we've got the BBC Accessibility Champions Network. It's about 170 of them. And to be honest, they keep leaving for other organisations. And we're like, yippee! Because every time even if the first encounter with accessibility isn't perfect, it kind of plants the seeds. And when we see people who've been at the idea that you come to the BBC and it might be the first time you've been pushed to make something accessible, and that's a useful thing. And then people then take it to other places with them. So yeah, just to copy what Paul was saying, really, which is if you can, it's a little bit like vaccinations. If you can get enough people vaccinated, then you get kind of herd immunity. And part of the role of the champions is to be the person in the room who sticks their hands up and goes, that's very nice, but how the hell are we going to make that work with a keyboard user right early in the design stage rather than towards the end? Sorry, I'm just monologuing. I should shut up now.
That's okay. No, if you have more to add, keep going.
Okay. I can monologue. Somebody asked in the chat who this is. This is Lion. He goes everywhere with me. He's about 4 foot long. So he's pretty big, and he goes in my backpack, and I get to do that great Mary Poppins thing where I pull him out of the bag and he just keeps going.
So, got a question here. Someone asks, do you guys have any advice to convince mid-level managers about the importance of accessibility? I think they prefer aesthetics over accessibility, but I understand we can have both.
Well, there's W3C just published an accessibility business case page. It kind of summarizes the standard arguments, and it's pretty good. I like the way it's summarized. You can Google it probably. I can post it afterwards if you don't find it.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the standard things. Another thing I want to focus on just within my organization is, is the what we call almost incidental accessibility. Is the idea of mobile users needing color contrast. We're all looking. The future now is speech communication. It's the Alexas and the Siris of the world. You should be able to talk to your device. Well, that's basically the same as a screen reader. It's about having labels that people can speak. Basically, more flexibility into future technologies and, standing out from the competition because your accessibility has to become a differentiator. And in the US, of course, there's a litigation aspect of it. I think in 2018 alone, there are probably close to 1,000 accessibility lawsuits that have been filed, or at least litigation letters have been sent. So this is not how I want to. I don't want that to be the accessibility motivator because people may start focusing on the wrong thing. They focus on compliance rather than a great experience. But if you don't have a cheesecake but you have a stick, you have to use it.
So I've got two I can.
Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry. I'm not very good at turn taking, especially when it's over the internet. We need all like little flags or something. That would be a useful adaptation. So on the business case side of things, sometimes it's better not to ask for permission. So much of accessibility stuff is just about how things are built, that sometimes you don't need it to be a thing. It can slowly become the way that things are done. So for the BBC, quite a lot of times, even at the BBC, if we go to someone and go, here's 20 accessibility problems, go and fix them, we're going to get rebuffed because people have limited time. Even the attention to think about it is valuable. But if we go and chat to developers and go, this is a really good way of building this, they will often go, well, that's great. And they will start using that. So we haven't had to make a business case for accessibility because it's just kind of started happening little bit by little bit, one at a time.
Yeah, and I'd also say always be wary if somebody tries to pose the question as an either or, right? It's aesthetics or accessibility. Unfortunately, I don't have a list, but I think it was my brother was sharing me recently with me some sites he saw that were accessible and aesthetic, right? But it's often the type of thing, there's a tendency to do that. We can either have security or accessibility. But really the idea is that you have to solve all of the problems. You got to be aesthetic. You got to be secure. You got to be accessible. There's a bunch of things. And most of the time those can be, it's rare that you have to do either or. Most of the time you can do both. The difference between either or in that, right, aesthetics or accessibility usually means I want to do something and it's not accessible, right? So it's got to be either or. Either do it my way or it's accessible. But really the idea is if you're really interested in aesthetics, making things look good, and making it accessible, you can find a path to accomplish both. You make a determination that you're only doing one or the other, that you get into trouble.
Can I quickly?
Just really quick. One very specific thing that you can tell people is that, for example, if you're trying to focus on making something accessible to a screen reader user, and then you bring up search engine optimization, they're very closely aligned. Now, there's not a one-to-one correlation, but if you think about it, any search engine like Google, for example, is essentially a blind user that is going through and is accessing the text or the alternative text for the images and things like that. And so if Google can get to it, it is probably at least reasonably accessible to a blind user. I will admit that making it accessible to a true human being is even more complicated than making it accessible to Google. But that said, if you bring that up as a starting point for the conversation and say, well, making something accessible to screen reader users will make it better optimized for search engines, then your middle manager or whoever it is going to probably go, oh, that actually makes some sense to me. And then you can go from there and you can do the extra things that make it accessible to humans. But I think that's a good point for starting the conversation.
I've got a slightly sly way of doing it as well, which kind of appeals to people's egos, which is you say, well, no, Apple, the most valuable company in the world. They used to have this bloke called Steve Jobs, and he said that design was the way things work, not what they look like. And aren't we as good as Apple? And there's also a nice quote from Tim Cook, where someone said to him, "Ooh, what's the ROI on the stuff we're doing for blind people?" He says, "I don't care about the bloody ROI. It's in our nature. It's what we do. It's our values." So on the back of the BBC Pass, there is a little line that says the BBC is for everyone. And occasionally I've had to have the chat with someone and go, what you've just suggested is going to block blind people, keyboard users, my mum, my dad. Have you ever used your phone one-handed? Yeah, that won't work either. Do you have any kids at home? Yeah, and you start crossing out people and go, okay, that's great. You write to all of those organizations, you write to the RNIB and explain to them why you didn't want this feature to work for blind people. And then I think we're good. And, sometimes that works. Sometimes people frown at me.
So here's a practical idea that you might try with your find out, because aesthetics can be very personal, right? So find out what they think is an aesthetic site, and then show them an accessible version. Whether you have to create a UI from scratch to do that, or you can take an existing site and add accessibility, or find out that that site is already accessible. That may be a way to demonstrate to them that it's not an either or, but you can do both, right? And that's partly what you want to get them to. You want to get them to, this is not do accessibility and then we'll have ugly sites, or we'll have beautiful sites that aren't accessible, right? It's actually, someone once told me a story, you have people are, you can either have food that tastes good or looks good. The fact is, we all want food that does both. You don't do either or. So, again, that's kind of thing is if somebody gets into that might be doing a practical example, may be a way to demonstrate to them. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can accomplish both things.
This is extremely important. If if your request is followed, if you can accompany your request for accessibility with a demo of where it's been done and how it can be done successfully, if you can do that demo within your own organization, say on specific platform or set of pages or a course, or you can say sign up a video transcription contract with one of the vendors. There's a lot of good vendors in the space and it costs almost nothing, and say, hey, no, these videos are transcribed for $4 a page or $4 a minute of content. And look, now like anybody can watch the meeting with the sound off. Just imagine all the people in your office that need to watch the training video, but they don't want to disrupt the people around them. Now they can do it because it's subtitled. Well, it's got captions, which is more than just subtitles. But yeah, this idea of a pilot project, don't just ask for it. If you can show that it's doable, it's achievable, maybe you can even show it's fairly easy, then managers are that much more easily convinced.
Great. Well, it's now 11:01 a.m. Time flew by, but if you did have questions that we didn't get to, I'll try to send those to our panelists. If they can weigh in, I'll pass along those answers via email. But with that, I just want to thank everybody. Jamie, Tim, Berkier, Paul, thank you guys so much. Thanks to everyone who hopped on. We do have a second webinar celebrating this holiday later this afternoon if folks want to hop on. And that's all. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye.